Vegas saw the future coming years ago, saw it clearly. Saw the leisure tourists disappearing, the families who used to come twice a year now priced out, the retirees switching to tribal casinos where someone still knew their name, the younger generation scrolling past Vegas on their phones without a second thought. The core visitors were leaving. The weekend warriors were spending less. The pipeline that fed 40 million tourists a year to the Strip was cracking everywhere. So Vegas made a bet, a massive multi-billion-dollar bet, the kind of gamble that would reshape the city's entire identity. The bet: conventions, business travelers, trade shows, corporate events, medical conferences, and tech expos and industry gatherings that bring 50,000 people to town, whether they want to be there or not. Captive audiences. People who didn't choose Vegas, whose companies chose it for them, who showed up because their industry was here, because their boss told them to, because skipping the conference meant missing the networking, missing the deals, missing the career advancement. Vegas would become a convention city, the meetings capital of America, a place that didn't need tourists to love, it just needed them to show up. The gamble is failing, and Vegas bet more than it can afford to lose. Today I'm showing you the convention gamble. Why Vegas bet everything on business travel. The billions, not millions, billions spent building infrastructure for a future that might not arrive. The assumption that conventions would save the Strip, that business travelers would replace leisure tourists, that captive audiences would spend like willing visitors. Every assumption was wrong. The math doesn't work. The travelers don't spend. The space sits empty. The gamble is already losing. And Vegas can't take the bet back. The buildings are built. The debt is owed. The chips are on the table, and the cards are being dealt. If you're new here, I expose the bets Vegas made that aren't paying off, the strategies that sounded smart in boardrooms, the projections that convinced investors, the futures that justified billions in construction and look disastrous now that reality has arrived. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because the convention gamble is one of the biggest miscalculations in Vegas history, bigger than Resorts World's timing, bigger than the luxury pricing bubble. A bet that reshaped the entire city around a future that isn't materializing. And the consequences? They're just starting to show. The empty convention halls, the struggling properties, the math that gets worse every quarter. This is a slow-motion disaster, and most people don't even know it's happening. Let me show you how big this bet actually was. The scale of the investment, the infrastructure Vegas built for a convention future it was counting on. Because unless you understand how much Vegas committed, how many billions, how much square footage, how complete the transformation, you won't understand how catastrophic it is that the bet isn't paying off. This wasn't a hedge. This wasn't a small diversification. This was all in. Every chip pushed to the center of the table. And the table is about to turn. Start with the Las Vegas Convention Center, the anchor of the whole strategy. $1 billion for the expansion alone. Not the whole building, just the expansion. Added 1.4 million square feet of exhibition space. Glass and steel stretching across the desert, big enough to hold multiple massive trade shows simultaneously. The total facility now, 2.5 million square feet. The largest convention center in North America. Bigger than Chicago, bigger than Orlando, bigger than anywhere else trying to capture the convention market. Walk through it on an empty day, and there are a lot of empty days, and feel the scale. The halls that could hold aircraft, the ceilings that disappear into darkness, the carpet that stretches to the horizon, the silence where 50,000 attendees are supposed to be bustling. $1 billion for one building, and that's just the beginning. Caesars Forum, $375 million. 550,000 square feet of convention space connected directly to the Strip. 2 pillarless ballrooms, the 2 largest pillarless ballrooms in the world, built specifically to capture business that the main convention center couldn't handle. The overflow, the premium events, the corporate gatherings that wanted Strip access. MSG Sphere, $2.3 billion. Yes, it hosts concerts. Yes, it's a technological marvel. But the business case that justified that price tag, the projections that convinced investors to write checks that big was anchored in conventions, corporate events, product launches, experiential marketing for trade shows. The most expensive entertainment venue ever built, and a massive chunk of the math depended on convention traffic. And then every major property on the Strip, Venetian added meeting space. Mandalay expanded its convention facilities. Caesar's Palace built ballrooms. Wynn upgraded. Aria upgraded. Everyone saw the same future. Everyone built for it. Conference rooms where restaurants used to be, ballrooms where lounges used to be, breakout rooms and executive boardrooms and networking spaces carved out of buildings that used to be designed purely for leisure. Total investment across the last decade, somewhere north of $5 billion, all betting on conventions, all assuming the business travelers would come. $5 billion. Maybe more, the private investments are hard to track, but at least $5 billion committed to convention infrastructure over the last decade. The largest convention center in North America, a $2.3 billion sphere whose business model depends on corporate events. Hundreds of thousands of square feet added at every major property, an entire city transformed into a convention machine. Vegas didn't just bet on conventions, it went all in, pushed every chip to the center of the table, told investors and taxpayers and property owners, this is the future. This is how we survive the decline of leisure tourism. This is the play. And now the cards are being dealt. The conventions are returning, some of them. CES fills the building every January. A few other big shows do well, but the rest of the year, the halls echo, the ballrooms sit empty. The exhibition space that was supposed to be booked solid has tumbleweeds rolling through it in February, in July, in October. The business travelers aren't showing up in the numbers Vegas promised itself. The projections that justified $5 billion in construction, they're not materializing. The future Vegas built for isn't arriving. $5 billion in infrastructure, waiting for customers who aren't coming. The convention gamble is on the table, the bet is placed, the chips can't be taken back. And the house for the first time in Vegas history might lose. The convention infrastructure is built, the space exists, $5 billion of concrete and steel and square footage ready and waiting. The bet is placed, the chips are on the table. Now let me show you why it's failing, why the conventions aren't filling the space, why the business travelers aren't replacing the leisure tourists, why the multi-billion-dollar gamble is already underwater. The world changed, and Vegas built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. The pandemic taught corporations something, a painful, expensive, clarifying lesson that they're never going to forget. You don't need to fly everyone to Vegas. You can do meetings on Zoom. You can do conferences virtually. You can do hybrid events where the executives attend in person and everyone else watches from their laptops at home. You can do product launches as live streams. You can do trade shows as virtual exhibitions. And the cost savings were massive. No flights, that's $500 per attendee saved. No hotels, that's another $800. No per diems, no ground transportation, no 3 days of lost productivity for a meeting that could have been a video call. CFOs looked at the numbers and had revelations. We spent how much sending people to conferences? For what measurable return? The pandemic ended. The lessons didn't disappear. The budget stayed cut. The travel policies stayed tight. The default shifted permanently from let's meet in person to do we really need to meet in person? Convention attendance is down across the entire industry, not just in Vegas, everywhere. The whole model of flying thousands of people to a central location to wander exhibition halls and collect brochures, it's shrinking. The pie itself is getting smaller. But Vegas built the most infrastructure, made the biggest bet, has the most to lose when the pie shrinks. CES still fills the convention center every January, 200,000 people descending on Vegas to see the latest gadgets. That week, the bet looks brilliant. That week, the infrastructure makes sense. But how many other weeks sit empty? How many of those 2.5 million square feet have tumbleweeds rolling through them in February, in July, in October? The mega shows still come. The rest of the calendar is a problem, and you can't pay for $5 billion of infrastructure with one good week in January. But here's where the bet really falls apart. Even when convention attendees do show up, even when they walk through the doors of the hotels and casinos, they don't behave like leisure tourists. They don't spend like leisure tourists. And that difference is killing the math. Convention attendees are captive, but they're not customers. Not the way Vegas needs customers. Think about who these people actually are. They didn't choose Vegas. Their company chose Vegas. They're not excited to be here. They're assigned to be here. They're not on vacation. They're at work. There's a fundamental difference in how that person moves through a casino. They're on expense accounts, but tight expense accounts. The company pays for the flight. The company pays for the room, maybe a dinner, maybe a couple of drinks at the networking reception. But the gambling, that's personal money. And most convention attendees aren't gamblers. They're accountants and software salespeople and middle managers and marketing directors. They have 8 a.m. sessions tomorrow. They have clients to meet. They have bosses watching whether they expense anything inappropriate. They're not here to party, they're here to work. And working people in Vegas don't gamble like vacationing people in Vegas. Watch the convention crowd move through the strip. Really watch them. They don't explore. They don't wander into casinos to see what's happening. They don't stumble past slot machines on their way to a show. They shuttle. Convention center to hotel. Hotel to dinner venue. Dinner venue back to hotel. Maybe a team outing to a restaurant their company booked. They eat at the conference, the boxed lunches, the catered dinners. They network at the reception, the one their company paid for. They collapse in their rooms at 10 p.m. because they have a 7 a.m. breakfast meeting. They never walk past a slot machine, never sit at a blackjack table, never generate the gaming revenue that actually pays for these buildings. The average convention visitor generates a fraction of what the average leisure tourist generates. A fraction. The leisure tourist is here to spend, brought money specifically to lose, budgeted for gambling, for shows, for expensive dinners, for bottle service, for the full Vegas experience. They're here to have the time of their life and they'll pay whatever it costs. The convention attendee is here to not get fired, to attend their sessions, to make contacts, to represent their company. They're not here to have fun, they're here to work. And when the day ends, they're exhausted. They don't want to gamble, they want to sleep. Same hotel room occupied, same restaurant seat filled, but completely different revenue generated. Vegas built convention infrastructure, assuming convention visitors would spend like leisure tourists. They don't, they never did, they never will. The math was wrong from the beginning. And here's the part Vegas didn't see coming, or saw coming and ignored, or saw coming and bet it wouldn't matter. Other cities built convention centers too. Orlando expanded massively. They've got Disney, they've got warm weather, they've got family appeal for attendees who want to bring their kids. San Diego expanded, perfect weather, beach access, a downtown that doesn't overwhelm people the way Vegas does. Chicago renovated McCormick Place. Still one of the largest in the country. Central location, cheaper than Vegas. Nashville became a player. Music City, trendy, hot. The cool alternative for companies that want their events to feel fresh instead of corporate. Miami wants in. New convention hotel projects. International appeal. Gateway to Latin America. Every city saw the same future Vegas saw. Every city is now competing for the same shrinking pie. Vegas has the biggest convention center, but biggest doesn't mean best. Biggest means highest fixed costs, highest operating expenses, the most square footage to heat and cool and staff and maintain, the most to lose when conventions don't show up. Some conventions are choosing other cities now. Cheaper cities. Cities where the hotels don't charge $400 a night. Cities where attendees don't get distracted by casinos and pools and everything else Vegas offers. The competitive moat Vegas thought it had the assumption that it was the only place that could host massive events is filling with water from every direction. Hybrid meetings, shrinking total attendance. Convention visitors who don't spend like leisure tourists. Competition from every other city in America building their own convention infrastructure. The bet Vegas made assumed conventions would grow forever, would fill the space, would replace the revenue from disappearing leisure tourists. Every assumption is wrong. Attendance is down, spending per visitor is down, competition is up, the pie is shrinking while more cities fight for smaller slices. Vegas built $5 billion of infrastructure for a convention boom that's turning into a convention bust. The space is built, the debt is owed, and the conventions aren't coming in the numbers Vegas needs. The gamble is losing. The question now is how much Vegas loses before it admits the bet was wrong. The convention bet is failing. The infrastructure is built but underutilized. The business travelers aren't replacing the leisure tourists. The math doesn't work, and never did. But what does that actually mean for Vegas? What's the real damage? What happens to a city that bet billions on a future that isn't arriving? Let me show you what the failed convention gamble actually costs. Not in theory, in reality, in buildings and debt and properties that don't know what they are anymore. $5 billion in infrastructure that can't generate the returns it promised. That's the starting point, the baseline damage. Convention centers that sit empty most weeks of the year. Those vast halls, 2.5 million square feet at the main convention center alone dark and silent in February, in July, in October. Waiting for trade shows that aren't coming. Waiting for corporate events that went hybrid. Waiting for a future that didn't materialize. The debt service on that infrastructure doesn't care about attendance. The bonds were sold, the loans were taken, the payments come due whether CES fills the building or not. Whether Caesars Forum hosts 3 events a month or 30, whether the Sphere books corporate clients or sits dark between U2 residencies. The operating costs don't flex either. The air conditioning runs, you can't let a convention center turn into an oven in the desert. The lights stay on in the common areas, the maintenance continues, the staff gets paid. The convention center loses money on empty days just like it makes money on full ones. And there are more empty days than anyone projected, many more. This is what stranded assets look like. Infrastructure built for a future that didn't materialize, investment that can't be recovered, debt that has to be serviced by revenue that doesn't exist. The taxpayers of Clark County are on the hook for the convention center. The room tax that was supposed to be covered by booming convention business, it's still being collected, still paying the debt, but the boom didn't come. The properties that built convention space are on the hook for their investments. The hundreds of millions in meeting rooms and ballrooms and breakout spaces debt service due whether the rooms are booked or not. Everyone who bet on this future is discovering the future didn't show up, and the bills are coming due anyway. But here's where it gets worse. The convention failure doesn't just hurt the convention business, it ripples through the entire strip. Some properties went all in on conventions, redesigned their entire operations around weekday corporate traffic, converted casino space to meeting space, added ballrooms where restaurants used to be, built their whole business model around the assumption that convention attendees would fill the building Monday through Thursday. Those properties are struggling worst. The convention traffic they designed for isn't materializing at projected levels. The leisure tourists, they alienated the ones who wanted restaurants instead of meeting rooms, casino floors instead of exhibition space. They're not coming back. The properties are stuck in the middle, too convention-focused for leisure travelers, not convention-focused enough to dominate that shrinking market. The Westgate, the old Las Vegas Hilton, Elvis's Hotel, the property bet everything on conventions, built one of the largest convention spaces attached to any hotel on the Strip. Positioned itself as the convention alternative, stay here, walk to the convention center, never deal with strip traffic. Now it struggles. Struggles with occupancy, struggles with revenue, struggles with identity. The convention crowds it designed for don't fill the building. The leisure tourists who might otherwise stay there see a property that doesn't seem designed for them. It's a convention hotel without enough conventions. A leisure property without enough leisure appeal. Trapped. The Westgate isn't alone. The properties clustered near the convention center all made the same bet. All assumed spillover traffic from CES and NAB and Magic and SEMA would fill their rooms, pack their restaurants, crowd their casino floors. Some of that happens during the big shows, during CES week. But CES is 1 week. The rest of the year, those properties are fighting for scraps, fighting for the leisure tourists who have better options on the Strip. Fighting for the convention overflow that doesn't overflow because the conventions themselves are smaller. The convention bet didn't just fail at the convention center, it failed at every property that built around it. Here's the deeper damage. The damage that doesn't show up on balance sheets, but might be the most destructive of all. Vegas wanted to be a convention city because it was afraid of being a casino city, afraid that leisure tourism was dying, afraid that gambling wasn't enough anymore, afraid of the future it saw coming, the tribal casinos, the changing demographics, the generation that wasn't developing the Vegas habit. So it invested billions in becoming something else, in attracting a different customer, in building a different future, in transforming from Sin City to Meeting City, and now it's discovering the different future isn't better, the different customer doesn't spend. The convention gamble didn't save Vegas from declining leisure tourism, it might have made things worse. Because those billions could have gone somewhere else. Could have renovated the leisure properties, could have rebuilt the buffets and the shows and the amenities that leisure tourists actually wanted. could have invested in competing for the customers who actually gamble, who actually spend, who actually make the economics of these buildings work. Instead, billions went into convention centers and meeting rooms and ballrooms, infrastructure for a customer who doesn't spend, space for events that went virtual, a bet on business travelers who behave nothing like the leisure tourists Vegas actually needed. The opportunity cost might be the real damage, not just what Vegas lost on the convention bet, but what Vegas gave up chasing the wrong future. Every dollar that went into Caesars Forum could have renovated Caesars Palace. Every dollar that went into convention infrastructure at the properties could have improved the guest experience for leisure travelers. Every dollar that went into meeting space could have gone into the amenities that make people want to visit Vegas. Instead, Vegas built for a customer who was never going to save it, and neglected the customer who might have. The convention gamble was supposed to be a hedge, a diversification, a way to protect Vegas from the decline of leisure tourism. Instead, it's a double failure. Vegas now has declining leisure tourism and a convention business that can't fill the buildings it built, both bets losing simultaneously. The worst possible outcome. The leisure tourists are still disappearing priced out, going to tribal casinos, choosing other destinations. That trend continues. The convention bet didn't stop it, and the conventions aren't replacing them, aren't filling the gap, aren't generating the revenue that was supposed to offset the leisure decline. Vegas bet that conventions would save it, the bet lost, and the original problem, the leisure tourism decline, is still there, unsolved, getting worse. Two holes in the ship now instead of one, both taking on water, and no obvious way to plug either one. The convention gamble was Vegas's biggest bet in a generation, $5 billion or more. The largest convention center in North America, a $2 billion sphere. Meeting space at every major property, an entire economy repositioned around business travel. The bet is losing. Hybrid meetings reduce demand permanently. Convention visitors don't spend like leisure tourists and never will. Competition from other cities is intensifying every year. The space is built and the space is empty. Vegas bet that conventions would save it from declining leisure tourism. Instead, Vegas now has declining leisure tourism and a convention bust on top of it. The gamble that was supposed to hedge against one failure created a second failure. Billions invested in the wrong future, while the right future, finding a way to bring leisure tourists back, went unfunded. The convention centers will stand, the meeting rooms will exist, the infrastructure isn't going anywhere. But the revenue to justify it isn't coming. The business travelers aren't spending. The bet isn't paying off. And Vegas is discovering what every gambler eventually learns. When you go all in on the wrong hand, you don't just lose your bet, you lose your ability to make a better one. Hit subscribe to track the gamble. I'm watching convention attendance, the infrastructure utilization, the properties struggling with their convention bets. Every sign that the billions invested aren't generating the returns Vegas promised itself. Drop a comment. Have you been to a Vegas convention? Did you gamble? Did you explore the Strip? Or did you shuttle from the conference to your hotel and collapse? What was your experience as a convention visitor versus a leisure visitor? Because Vegas needs to understand who convention tourists actually are, not who they hoped they'd be, not who the projections said they'd be, who they actually are. The convention gamble is on the table. The cards have been dealt, and the house for once is losing. $5 billion, wrong bet, and no way to take it back. I'll see you in the next one.